Right, good evening, colleagues. Welcome to this June meeting of the Planning Committee. Can I, as first item, take apologies for absence?
Sorry, Chrissy Stamp.
Thank you.
Chair, I'm actually subbing for Councillor Stuart Tranter.
Right, agenda item 2 is the record of the meeting. Now, before I ask to sign that, can I ask you to turn to page 7? And at the very bottom of page 7, you have the decision in relation to Planning Application 2272. I would ask you to strike out the word Crevel, and it should read provision of 100% affordable housing for the adjacent site. With that amendment, can I sign those minutes? Okay. Disclosures of pecuniary interest. Councillor Potter.
Thank you, Chair. Non-pecuniary interest in items 5 and item 6. Item 5, I have a number of interests both locally and through the council. Item 6, I have a local interest as a ward councillor and a local resident. And on both those items, I have requested to speak as ward councillor.
Thank you. I have nobody else who's indicated, so that then takes us to the first application, which is agenda item 5 and is the former Splashes Leisure Centre, Bloors Lane. Mr. Harris.
Chairman, thank you very much. Members, you'll be familiar with this application. You have had a presentation on it a few months ago to explain the basis of it and to hear your comments and questions upon it. But this is the application site of Bloors Lane here. You've got the car park, what was the sports centre there, Cosserton Park just in there. So some views of the site. That's the entrance, so you can see how the where the building was is now hoarded off, and that's the view looking up towards the A2, and then the other view looking down towards the north. And then this is a view from Cosserton Park looking back towards the hoarded site where the sports complex used to be. So you've got the skate park just in there. Point to be aware of here is that really the formal part of the Cosserton Park is this area here on the other side, and then past this footpath here is when you start to get more towards where the sports complex was and is, and then this is within the car park again looking towards where the sports complex was and towards the back of Cranford Close. This plan is quite helpful because what it shows here is the outline of the previous leisure centre that was on the site, and superimposed on it in grey is the proposed sports complex. So the point I was trying to say there is in terms of, yes, it does encroach further into the park a little bit, but it doesn't encroach onto that formal area where you would have seen football pitches and other play areas on there. The other thing you'll notice from the report, which is about the leisure use of the site and the principle of this is a replacement of a leisure facility. It's of a similar size, slightly larger, and therefore the principle is acceptable. We feel that locating it in approximately the same location as the previous leisure centre is the right idea here, and creates the minimum disturbance, creates the greatest visual impact onto Bloors Lane in terms of advertising its location. You've got the car park in here and no encroachment onto the main park. Here's the site plan with an aerial photograph with the new building superimposed, and you can see you got your photovoltaics on the roof just there. And moving through into the actual layout of the site, we have electric vehicle charging points in this location here in the car park. We have disabled car parking in this location here, with the most accessible location into the reception area. We have cycle parking here and in here. We also have additional tree planting as shown. And going into what's proposed on site, this is set out on pages 24 over to 25. So you have the 25-metre pool here. You have the leisure pool. You have the changing facilities in here, the cafe area in there, reception area through here, the office, the back office, first aid room, toilets within the site, pool and chemical storing areas and plant room in there. Then up above into the first floor, obviously this covers two floors, but you have a multi-purpose community and fitness studio, which is in there, which is also a party room as well. You have the further plant room in there, administrative offices in this area here, and storage rooms, as well as the fitness gym coming through this area just there. In terms of elevations, it's probably better in the superimposed CGIs that you'll see at the end. But this is the northern elevation facing down Blaw's Lane. This is the rear elevation, so you've got the back of the reception area and offices in here, fitness gym above there, the party rooms in this area here, a multi-purpose area in this area here. Then in the other elevation, this is where you've got the reception and cafe area, and then you've got the fitness gym above this area just there. So some CGIs which I think are helpful. So that's the entrance to the site, the cafe just in there, the swimming pool and kids splash area in there, fitness gym just above it, and then the entrance to the site, showing that view at a slightly further distance. And then looking at the rear from Cossington Park, that's the view that you'll get. So you've got the offices and here the fitness gym just above there. Then looking down at the swimming pool and the kids pool just there. We think it's a good design scheme. We think it's been well laid out, well planned. It does include measures to deal with energy efficiency in it, as members questioned at the time of the presentation. You've got the rooftop air source heat pumps and photovoltaic panels as well. And materials will be of a better quality than the previous sports centre on there, and will provide for a leisure centre which will be well used by local residents. And we're recommending it for approval, Chairman, subject to conditions as set out. Thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, Councillor Potter wishes to speak to you as a ward councillor. Do you agree? Councillor Potter, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members, and thank you, Dave, for the presentation. I said that I had sort of multiple interests in this project. I was a member of the Splashes Task Group, which has now become the Splashes Delivery Board. For years before that, I was lobbying for splashes to be brought into the 21st century. And at a local level, this is where I learnt to swim. I was swimming here until the centre closed, and like many in the community, I'm delighted to see that it's got to this stage and that the project is progressing. When I first saw the proposals with the two swimming pools, it was different to what I was expecting. In my mind, I was thinking we just have one big pool, but I actually think this is the best way to go. And the way the space is being used now, it's actually a slightly bigger footprint, but we're actually getting two pools that are roughly the same size as the main pool area from the previous pool that was there. And we're utilising more second level space now as well. So all of the gym is upstairs on the second level, as well as the party room and the party room / mixed use space, whether that be used for classes as well. I think it probably will be. And I think something that I really like about the way the building is laid out, there's lots of spaces here that could be put to different uses, so that we've got that flexibility with this new centre. So, we don't know how things are going to develop over future years in terms of what the demand will be from the local community for different services, but there is a potential for this building to be used. Dave was very helpful in supporting me with a local exhibition, which we invited. So it was an exhibition for all local people, but we actually had a manned exhibition just for those who lived in close proximity to the site, because I knew they would have different interests to the wider public who just want to come and see, what the pool's going to look like or how big the gym is going to be. So in terms of the response from the public there are concerns around community safety. I'm very pleased to say that the building will be developed in accordance with the secure design standards, and there are matters that are in hand with the community safety team and senior officers at the council with regard to wider community safety in the park. I think one of the issues we have at the moment is with no splashes. You've got a hoard in there, you've got no lighting, you've got no overlooking of that area. So actually having the leisure centre there will be really beneficial for community safety issues, and that's something that Dave will recall that we discussed that with local residents who felt quite assured by what was being proposed. A lot of the feedback was around the interior facilities, which aren't strictly planning matters. And I think the council did sort of undersell some of the interior. For example, the flume that's shown there is not enclosed, and it will be enclosed, and the beach / splash zone area for the younger kids is going to be a lot better than what is shown in those images there. It's very difficult to see anything in those images of the children's area. I think the cafe being for community use is excellent. I think I would have preferred it overlooking the park, but there was a trade-off as to whether it should overlook the pools or overlook the park, and the pools were seen as more of a priority for particularly for those parents who might be coming to watch their children take part in swimming classes and what have you. So I think probably that was the best compromise. I know there was a debate between Councillor Hatwell and Dave as to whether what pool was the best one to be closest to the cafe. I don't know if that's been resolved now or not. I think having the charging bays and all the efficiency measures, I think that's really, really good to see that we're building a building that is got climate change very much in focus and as a priority. And then just finally, in terms of the construction management and engagement of the public, I think it's really, really important throughout the stage of the project that there is engagement from the construction company with the local residents. It could be that today's not a good day, but you're washing out because of what they're doing, or we're going to be a bit noisier today. Just that engagement, just to keep everybody on board, because it's a really positive thing for the community, and we don't want to upset local people and ruin that. But members, I do hope you support this application. I think it will be an excellent facility for Rainham and for the whole of Medway. Thank you.
Thank you. Other members? Any other member that wishes to speak to this item? Councillor Hackwell?
Thank you, Chair. I 100% support the rebuilding of splashes as soon as we can. And in fact, earlier this month, we recommended at Cabinet that it goes to full council to release some funds early to make this building happen early. So I'm 100% behind building it. However, I still do have concerns about the design, specifically around the swimming lane pool being next to the cafe. My perception is that if parents or grandparents take their young children to swimming, they would like to see themselves enjoying themselves in the leisure pool, those young children, while they look on from the cafe. With this design, they're only going to be seeing fitness people doing lane swimming up and down, and won't be able to see their grandchildren or their children enjoying themselves from the cafe. I do echo Councillor Potter's comments about the cafe. I think the cafe would be better, if it was accessible from the outside and overlooking the park, etc. So I do have some fundamental issues with the design of this, but I'm 100% behind getting this built as soon as possible. Thank you.
Councillor O'Para.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Dave, for the presentation. I am delighted, just like the World Councillor, that this project has come this far. However, I'm concerned about the residents' engagement, as alluded to by the Ward Councillor. I want to know, Dave, or any officer, how this can be managed. Is there something within here, obviously, to ensure that during construction, our residents are not upset by, the noise, the lorries and things like that? Is there a way we can possibly manage that to ensure that what has been a good thing happening within the community and indeed the entire Medway doesn't now resort to something of, obviously, annoyance to our residents? Please, thank you.
Chairman, thank you very much. And I think the point that you're saying, Councillor Parra, is about the construction, disturbance during construction, which is understandable, and we do encounter this in a lot of developments. We have a construction and environmental management plan condition, as condition 3, which will deal with a lot of those issues. What we could also do, and the advantage here is obviously it's a construction by the council, and it'll be our contractors. What we can do is ensure that if there is disturbance, then through the ward councillors, we can have that discussion with the site manager to try and mitigate and minimise any disturbance.
I don't have anybody else who has indicated. I think it's a sad situation that we are here. It's a great pity that what was built there initially hasn't stood the test of time. And quite clearly, it would have been much cheaper if it had stood the test of time, but we are where we are. I think the design is subjective. There are those who would prefer things in different places, but we have to make our decision based on what's in front of us. So I'll ask the Vice Chairman to move the recommendation.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm pleased to move for agenda item 5, the officer recommendation, which is that of approval, and draw members' attention to the fact that there are suggested conditions numbered 1 to 22, moved on that basis.
Those in favour?
Chair, that's 12-4.
Thank you. Those to the contrary?
1 against, and obviously Councillor Potter not.
The application for the former splashes succeeds, and we move to agenda item 6, where again Councillor Potter has asked to address you as a ward member. Do you agree? Mr. Harris.
Chairman, thank you very much. I think firstly apologies to members because I don't think that the report here is particularly clear for members. So I will give a little bit of background, which might also help Councillor Potter when he's speaking as ward councillor. When members approved the application for Bellway to develop on this site, there was discussion at the meeting about access from Macklan's estate into the site and from the site. I confirmed to the committee that there'd be no vehicular access, but I had a personal preference that there would be some pedestrian access into the site, as I felt that would enable residents in this area here to be able to come through the site and access into the nature reserve and another site and other areas on Lower Rainham Road, the public footpath network, the Riverside Country Park, etc. It would also give residents in here another route to go up to Rainham Station and Rainham Centre. Councillor Potter had a contrary view to that, which I respect. And as a result of that, the committee said that when the conditions are submitted in relation to boundary treatment, they wanted us to, as officers, to undertake a consultation with all the residents in Macklan's here to see what their preference was, whether it was for a solid boundary through here, so there'd be no vehicular or pedestrian access, or whether they would prefer to see a pedestrian access through there. Bellway clearly felt that the likely response to that consultation was no access at all, because their plans which have come in show a 1 in 3 bund going through here. This is the Mackland estate down here, and then a retaining wall coming through there as well. So therefore, it would be exceptionally difficult for pedestrian access to come through from Macklands. We undertook the consultation. We gave residents 2 options. Option A was to have a pedestrian access. Option B was not to have a pedestrian access. We had 81 responses. 4 supported option A, 77 supported option B. So if it helps members, despite it being contrary to my personal wishes, the recommendation is that you would go with option B, which is what Belway proposed, that there is no pedestrian or vehicular access from Macklands. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Potter, do you still wish to speak to this item, bearing in mind what you've just heard?
If I may. So thank you to Dave for agreeing to the consultation, and I should say that my interest here is that I did make representations on behalf of my local community, firstly against this development, and then for having a consultation, because it was my view that most residents wouldn't want the access, which is what has turned out. And I also live on this estate, albeit not the bit that would be directly affected by the access. The concern I have is with the proposal that's before us here. So it's talking about a retaining wall along part of that section which borders the Macklands estate. At the moment, or prior to the development, there was just a 2-metre high fence there, which in places had gaps where people would break through if they wanted to access into the nature reserve and other areas. So the agreement was, the option B was for a solid separation between the estate and between the existing estate and the new estate. And my concern is, with what's presented before us here, I'm not getting the clear detail as to how that will be a secure separation between the 2 estates. I envisaged a wall similar to what we've got, a very nice wall, a beautiful wall, similar to what we've got along Finwell Road, with perhaps a hedge in front of that as well, just to break it up aesthetically, rather than, well, I can't really make head or tail of this, to be honest with you. So obviously you're not going to come back to me directly on that one, but that's my concerns, if members could take that up.
Chairman, thank you. Just to clarify, because these are private houses here, and then you've got garages just in there, so the potential area for breakthrough for pedestrians was really in these 2 areas there. What Belway have come up with is this bund running through here, which is a 1 in 3 bund. So, and then this, as I said, this retaining wall through there, which makes it very difficult for people to come through there. It's not an easy way through. I understand what Councillor Potter is saying, that the lighter foot youngsters could possibly still go through there. If members wish to see something more like a wall, then we can go back and negotiate that. Thank you.
Councillor Buckwell.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm absolutely perplexed by the way this item appears on our agenda. If I look at the covering index, it indicates a planning application, details pursuant to. Our agenda item 6 is a letter. It is a letter which refers in itself to 4 conditions, but the conditions 6 and 8 are still awaiting comment in any event. So I'm utterly perplexed as to the format in which this application has come before members. it doesn't have a recommendation either, even if redacted simply to outstanding details for conditions approved in principle. Sort of, in commas, constitutionally, I don't understand what is before us.
I have to say I tend to agree with you. And it seems to me that this is not clear. Is there anything urgent as far as this issue is concerned?
Chairman, no, I totally agree with members. I can only apologise, it's not clear. What you've got here is a letter which would have been sent to the applicants, and it's not a report. I can only apologise. That's why I tried to clarify it in my presentation. Yeah. But if members would prefer to defer it to the next meeting and have an improved report, then I'm comfortable with that.
Would it find general support if this goes away and comes back at the next meeting with the full report? Is that agreed? Thank you.
Madam Chairman, may I just anticipate that I think we would agree from that this should not have come here tonight. Technically, if it comes back in a different format, the ward member may have used up his speaking right by what hasn't been concluded this evening, but he spoke as ward councillor. Could the officers give a view as to whether it would be appropriate if Councillor Potter sought the consent of committee to speak on a proper agendaed application, that he should be allowed to do so?
So.
Our protocol is normally once.
Chairman,
but it's an ineffective application. We've just agreed that.
I do appreciate that, Vice Chairman. I think members of this committee are very clear on points that Councillor Potter was making, though. But it's the committee's call.
It is my view, I think, that we should stick to our policy. Councillor Potter has made a particularly good case. He has the ability to submit, when he sees the report, something in writing, should he wish to do so. That takes us then to agenda item 8, which is, oh no, it isn't. That is off of this evening's agenda.
Item 7, Chairman, page 45.
Right, I've turned over too many pages. Agenda item 7, 153 Fairview Avenue.
Thank you, Chairman. This is an application that members are aware of. Firstly, draw your attention to supplementary agenda advice, where you'll see we've had one further letter of representation received, expressing concern about the loss of the butcher shop, impact on parking availability, noise from customers and delivery drivers. It's a change of use from a butcher's shop to a takeaway pizza shop. You'll be aware of the planning history here, which is set out on page 46 and 47. So you'll be aware that there have been previous refusals and previous dismissed appeals. Page 48 tries to explain the basis of those appeals. So the first one was in 2019 and explained that was originally refused by members on 2 grounds. One in terms of the over-concentration of the of takeaways, and the second was in relation to parking and highway safety. That appeal was dismissed, but you'll see there in the middle of the page that the inspector said there'd be no harm to health, vitality and viability, and the proposal would broadly accord with the overall strategy, which seeks to avoid an overabundance of hot food within the primary retail function of the local centre, i.e. that inspector did not agree that there was an over-concentration of A5 units in the parade. However, they did agree that there was a potential harm in relation to highway safety. There was then a subsequent application which was submitted, which was also refused by the council on the basis of the highway impact and parking. That went to appeal, and the inspector considered that he or she was unable to conclude that the impact on development on the highway would be acceptable. Simply put, evidence hadn't been submitted. We now have this application before you, and I will pass on to my colleague Rob Neve in a second who will explain the difference between this application in terms of what's been submitted and what was considered by the inspector on the last appeal. This is the site just here. You'll see that you've got this parking area to the front, access to the rear, to a car parking area for employees. The existing floor layout and linked to, so there's very little change internally. The takeout, the cold store, you've got the pizza oven in there, but very little change. And externally, no change either. So I will pass on to Mr. Neve.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. So, as Dave rightly outlines, the two previous applications, the Highway Authority lodged objections in regards to lack of information to make an informed decision. As part of this application, the applicants have conducted a parking survey, conducted on a Thursday and Saturday, and then reviewed both the Bridhurst Road and Fairview Avenue, as well as the parking in front of the shops. And what this demonstrates that during the peak between sort of 4 and 4:45 and sort of 5:45, there is sort of high levels of parking pressure, but there's still sufficient, there's still spaces available. But as the evening progresses and the retail shops close, actually this parking availability increases, and to our mind that then means there is sufficient parking capacity to accommodate the proposed use. Now this information has been submitted, but as I say, the previous two were objected through lack of evidence, and the applicants have now submitted that evidence to give us the ability to make an informed decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Curry.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a problem with this application, primarily because of the fact that it's been refused twice, not just on parking grounds, but on other grounds as well. And I'm struggling to read the report, which gives a positive indication that this should be allowed. The residents are clearly against it. It's a site where there's a slight change between whether it's 15% land used for food outlets or not. That kind of, there's very fine margins here in that respect. But I'm actually trying to find in the report something positive to see why this should be allowed. So I do have strong concerns. The public health are quite concerned about it. It's close to a school. We've got policies on those issues which are very clear. And I think on this instance, I'm going to have to vote against this one. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I know this site very, very well. I was brought up fairly close to this, walked past it on my way to school as a youngster. I've seen it go through a greengrocer's and I think a dry cleaner before it was this, and now it's a butcher. So it's changed. It's changed its offering to the local community several times. I like Councillor Curry and perplexed why it's why it's being recommended for approval this time. I don't think much has changed. The parking hasn't really changed. I noticed in one of the conditions for the refusal in 2019, one of the conditions, should it be approved, that we would put a condition in that no delivery should take place. Was a recommendation from the planning officers from this premises. If this does get passed tonight, I hope we can put a condition like that in again, because I think although there is a hot food takeaway along that parade of shops, that particular takeaway does no deliveries, so we don't get crowds of Uber drivers or Deliveroos or Just Eat queuing up to use that parking space, which I should imagine with a pizza shop would be the primary method of actually selling pizzas. The Chinese takeaway there doesn't even take credit cards. You have to turn up and pay in cash, so no one gets anything delivered. So it would be a totally different aspect. I don't understand. It's about 160 metres from the entrance to a school. Along Fairview Avenue, there is an entrance at the rear of the school. I thought our policy was 500 metres or 400 metres from an entrance of a school, that we shouldn't approve new takeaways. So, like Councillor Curry, I am not going to vote in favour of this evening.
Councillor.
Hi. I think that we should test it. So I have no confidence in the application, so I would be supporting. I wouldn't be supporting it tonight, and I feel that maybe it's an opportunity for it to go to appeal again to see if we can still win on new grounds.
Councillor Thorne.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd actually concur with Councillor Curry and Councillor Hackwell here. I remember this committee less than a year ago when a further application for a hot food takeaway was done in Gillingham. Because it was close to a school, Medway Health Authority also said, you know, there's enough takeaways there, and the fact that we should be having this for 100-metre rule. And I totally agree with it. I can't see the reason why we should be breaking that rule under this application.
Well, quite clearly, I obviously know this area extremely well, and I'm totally and utterly puzzled by this measurement issue for a start. If you look at Street View, you have 5 shops here, 151 to 159. Next to that is a very large repair car garage, and then you've got a space and you've got 3 more shops. Now, I can't work out this issue of this 15% because the property which has got the shutters is a takeaway, and if you change what is the black and white property, that will be 2 out of 5 shops. So I cannot see how you can ever say that it's 15%. If you take the whole lot and you're taking the garage into it, that seems to me to be totally illogical. But anyway, just to get to a little closer to this, I knew very well the people who ran the off-licence who are now retired. They were constantly contacting either myself or the other ward councillors due to the fact that their business suffered because there was never any availability of parking in the evening. So what is going to be the prime time for this new venture? It's going to be the evening. And there is a lot of competition in that area between 6 and 10 o'clock. So if they can't park there, they're going to park out on Fairview Avenue. And I would say to you that Fairview Avenue is an extremely fast road. It's very straight, it's very flat, and it is the joiner between Maidstone Road and the extended Wigmore Road and the 278. So I can't see that by having produced 3 parking spaces at the rear for staff that you can have overcome the issues of parking. So there's no way that I would support it. I don't have anybody else who's indicated, so I'll move to the Vice Chairman, who needs to move the recommendation as on the order paper.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I do so for the purposes of the democratic process, subject to conditions 1 to 4.
Is that seconded? Well, thank you. Those in favour? Those to the contrary?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. I'm refused.
I think the reasons for refusal are basically very similar to the previous one, particularly around the parking issue.
Chairman, can I just clarify? Because the previous applications had different reasons for refusal. The 2019 application had 2 reasons for refusal. One in terms of the over-concentration of A5 units, and the second on parking in highway grounds. But following the appeal, the second application was only refused on highway safety and parking grounds. So just want clarification as to whether you want 1 or 2 reasons for refusal, please. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. So we have one inspector who took into account the quantum of, and one who didn't. So we're going with a third inspector. So are we therefore able to include both of the reasons that we've had previously because they weren't both carried through by both inspectors.
Chairman, you're entitled to refuse it on two grounds, and I understand those reasons. My only hesitation would be that the first inspector didn't agree with that over-concentration, despite our very clear guidance note. So he didn't agree with that reason for refusal, despite it very clearly being contrary to our guidance note. Now, I think Councillor Hubbard made the point, maybe it's worthwhile trying again with a different inspector. It's the committee's call, Chairman.
Can I take colleagues' views on that? Councillor Buckwell.
Madam Chairman, thank you. I'm not sure how common or whether it would be contrary to protocol to do so, but in setting out formal refusal reasons, which I think could be signed off under the protocol, which we operate for detailed reasons, is it possible for us actually to sort of recite to an appropriate degree those conflicts within the refusal reasons themselves? In other words, to make it very clear to who deals with those refusal reasons that we have refused, notwithstanding and in fact understanding that there were conflicts in previous appeal decisions. I think it's important that whoever might take further steps on receiving the refusal knows from from our wording that we have positively taken into account the matters to which Mr. Harris has referred, but nevertheless we still believe the overall outcome of refusal is correct.
Chairman, thank you. If members were to go for, in terms of the highway safety and car parking, I think that's clear. And that was, despite Mr. Neve's views as on this and the case officer's views. So I think the highway one I'm comfortable with. In relation to the point that you say, Councillor Buckwell, which is the over-concentration, if members, despite that previous appeal decision, still feel strongly about that, and I understand that, then we could have a reason for refusal on that. If it goes to appeal, we will make it very clear in the appeal statement that members very carefully considered that appeal history and came to a contrary view for X, Y, and Z reasons. That appeal statement, because it's an overturn by members, would need to be agreed by the chairman, who would be looking through it to making sure it did cover those points.
Councillor Hackwell.
Could we also put, if we lost the appeal, that we put a condition that there'd be no delivery, as we did previously, because I think it wouldn't be beneficial for a pizza place without delivery.
Okay.
Chairman, on that, we can actually absolutely recommend that, because we have to put forward the conditions we would like an inspector to impose should they be minded to approve the application. It will be down to the inspector whether he agrees with those, but we will put that forward, yes.
Councillor Curry.
Thank you, Chair. And in addition to that, other conditions, page 51 clearly says how public health have very serious concerns and objections, and obviously that's particularly relevant to the school. So the opening and closing times of when it could be conditioned as well to ensure the safety of the children from that point of view. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think we certainly should test the refusal on the number of takeaway units on that parade of shops with the inspector, presuming an appeal will follow this. Just because one inspector has come to a decision that it's not an issue doesn't mean that another inspector might come to a different decision. And from the feeling I get here, that is the overwhelming view of the committee, is that, possibly unanimous view of the committee, is that they are concerned about the number of takeaway units in that parade of shops, as well as the parking issues.
Right. Thank you, colleagues. Agenda item 8 and agenda item 9 are withdrawn at the applicant's request. That takes us then to the performance report. Mr. Harris.
Sorry, Chairman, thank you very much. Going through the performance report, this is the number of applications submitted through the course of the year compared to previous years. So you'll see that the team and yourselves have dealt with vastly increased number of applications during that time, number of determined as well. I would just say that we have in the last quarter, so it's not shown in these, it'll be in the next time I report these, that there has been a downturn in applications being received, maybe due to the economic climate at this moment in time, but the last year was certainly very good in terms of applications. Despite the number of applications we're receiving, performance by my officers and by yourselves was exceptional. You can see the target there in terms of what the government imposed on us and how we've achieved significantly more than that in terms of determination time period. Same for minor applications, same for other applications, well above the target. In relation to application fees, we did have a bumper year. I was nervous about it, I have to say. The budget I have is set very high, but we just about met that budget. I am nervous about the year coming on because it has been a very relatively quiet start to the year. In terms of how we compare to other authorities, you can see that within the statutory time period we compare very well to other authorities, that's us in the orange. Where we have agreed an extension of time, we're just below the what other authorities do, so we need to sharpen up on that. A number of appeals, they continue, where this committee, where our officers refuse applications or their appeals continue to come in, and we have an appeals report that I'll go through shortly. So this shows the number of appeals allowed and the number dismissed. So we are having more dismissed than allowed. However, our target, which is not a national target, it's our target, is of 30%. And you'll see in the last 2 quarters, more appeals have been allowed above the target. So over 40% of appeals allowed. In principle, that sends some warning signals. Maybe we're not following government policy, what the inspectors are, but we'll go through the appeal decisions after this. I'm not overly concerned myself at this moment in time. And indeed, one of the things that another authority has found is with applications, if you look at the number of applications received, particularly for major applications, and the number of those applications received allowed on appeal, if the number allowed on appeal is above 10% of the number received, then the government can take away your planning powers. There is an authority that have suffered that. We're nowhere near that at the moment. We're 0.9% or something like that, but we're well below the 10%. So I'm not overly concerned on appeals at the moment, but we'll go through them. This shows the prior approvals for permitted development. You know my feelings on permitted development or some permitted development rights. Units of construction and a number of units delivered. You'll see from 2018, 2019, 20 and 21, the number of units under construction increased dramatically, reflecting the efforts of this council and this committee to address the housing crisis that we're suffering and to try and address and meet our housing need. That is starting to be reflected in terms of completions. So it takes about 18 months from start to completion. So you can start to see how those years are reflected in here and those years start to be reflected in there. And these years will then be reflected in the year that we've just completed. And I can confirm that we've probably achieved a similar or just slightly greater than 2019-20 in the year 21-22. So that's great. That will help us with our housing delivery test. It won't get us to meet our need because our target, you can see, was 1586 there. In the next year, it's 1675. So despite the fact that we've had the 3 best years ever in terms of house building for Medway, we're still only 2/3 of our target in terms of meeting our housing need. Enforcement action, a lot of action continues to be taken. Some members will be aware that we also do some direct action. I am going to have to look at procedures for that. As a result of the direct action that we took recently on a very sensitive site, one of my officers received a very serious threat to their life, to their well-being, which caused them to be off sick, understandably. As a result of that, I will be implementing, if we take further direct action, I will take implementing measures to protect the anonymity of officers, so that won't happen again. It shows the number of complaints that we receive. We're also responsible for tree preservation applications. You'll see, looking at this one, and then looking at this one, which is the application determined compared to those received, that we're not meeting our target on that. That's despite exceptional amount of hard work by my tree officer. But he's dealing with tree applications, he's also dealing with comments on planning applications on tree issues, and also, quite rightly, we've got climate change. Trees are very important in terms of climate change. We've got biodiversity net gain now. That's very important in terms of trees. It's too much for one officer. I'm pleased to say that I have now authority to recruit or to change a vacant planner post to a tree officer, so we can start to address this backlog of applications. We are the lead local flood authority, and despite being one member of staff down there, she's still doing incredibly well. In relation to complaints, as members know, we live in planning is a world where no one is satisfied. If we approve something, the objectors are likely to complain. If we refuse something, then the applicants complain. We have this complaints process. The blue is where stage 1, where they complain to me. If they're not happy with my response, and normally I explain the processes, the policies and so on, most accept reluctantly that the decision was correct based on that. Some then take that to stage 2, which is the chief executive, and they respond. And if they're not happy with the chief executive's response, then they go to the ombudsman. In terms of the ombudsman, we had one decision during the quarter where we had used an air hunter to trace a relative in relation to an empty derelict property. The complainant claimed the council failed to trace relatives when his cousin passed away, which meant that they could not attend the funeral. That's not our role as planning authority, so the ombudsman dismissed that complaint. They also dismissed a complaint being out of time because someone chose years to complain about a property being constructed. The Ombudsman also refused to deal with a complaint in relation to a site in Princess Avenue that Councillor Golvin knows very well, where it was the applicant complaining there, and they had the ability to appeal to the planning inspectorate, so the Ombudsman pointed them in that direction. And then finally, the Ombudsman turned away 2 complaints in relation to our decisions not to take enforcement action, because he or she advised that they're unlikely to find fault with the council. And that's the performance and report, Chairman.
Members, any comments? Councillor Hackwell.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for the report, Dave. Congratulations on the very good performance, beating your 60% targets into the 90s. That's excellent. However, you have touched on it. Representing a ward which I believe probably most significant trees have got a TPO order on them. One of the biggest issues I suffer in my ward is people and TPO and tree performance issues. I looked at the graphs, just the question of the one in, you've got 2 colours on your graph for the applications in a conservation area. And are they cumulative or the orange bars part of the blue bars? If you see what I mean. I mean, if you take April, there was 20 applications received and about 7 that were in conservation. Well, the 7 part of the 20 that are additional. So that's 27 or whatever. Okay, well, my problem with that is that you receive something like, I've added the bars up, it might not be quite accurate, but it's about 268 applications, and you've only dealt with 166. So we're 100 behind in the last year, and that's assuming we had a 0 start point, which I very much doubt. So we are probably several hundred behind. We've got to catch up. Even with the new tree officer, what is your estimate that you will catch up to get applications up to the level of 60, 70, 80% as you do in the others? So it's very concerning for my ward.
100% agree with you, Councillor Hackwell. It is concerning, which is why I have employed a consultant who's helping us. But she, even with her, and she's not working 100% of her time with us, but even so, we're only breaking even with the work that she's doing, which is why I'm very grateful for authority being given and I know that you assisted in that, so I'm grateful, Councillor Hackwell, so that we get this new officer in post. But you're right in what you say, Councillor Hackwell. It's going to take time to get through that significant backlog. I can't give you a definitive answer on that. Whether it's 6 months, whether it's longer, I don't know, but it's going to take time because it is a significant backlog.
Councillor Curry.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points. I'll continue with Councillor Hackwell's point, but just looking at what's not going to happen then, because you mentioned that the new tree officer will be a post that was going to be filled by a planner, which is no longer going to happen. So I'm presuming that that's going to have an impact on the planning team. Is that? I'm trying to work out the logic behind that, and how I understand how strapped we all are for staffing across the board in all departments of the council. So obviously there's going to be an impact on other aspects of the planning work as a result of that. My second question is in relation to housing numbers, so I'll hold that for a second.
Chairman, thank you. And you're right, Councillor Curry, in that in an ideal world I would have wanted an additional member of staff rather than a post being changed. I wasn't going to get that because of financial budget reasons. What I did was to look at where we've managed to bring in some efficiencies, which is at that planner level, where, dealing with householder applications, where we've got a much simpler way of dealing with householder applications now, which probably saves a lot of time. As a result of that, if I'm going to lose a post, that was a post I was happy to lose to become a tree officer, because I think, as you quite rightly pointed out Simon and Gary, there is huge pressure in relation to trees, and with climate change, as you know, I'm telling you something you already know, Simon, with climate change in it and so on, we need that tree officer.
That's great, thank you. My other question, just a sort of technical question really, you talked about the number of units that are currently being built, that table you showed, and that was under construction and then completions. I was just wondering about the gap between permission and construction starting. How wide is that gap on average?
That's a really good question, and it's a point I've made to the government many times, Councillor Curry, because this belief that you grant planning permission one day and the next day or the next month you start to get delivery is simply not is so far from the truth. It's unbelievable. As you quite rightly say, you can give an outline planning permission, say at this committee tonight. That's an outline planning permission. That's just in principle. They've then got to market the site to a developer. A developer then will have to do to look at the site and consider what are the issues, the constraints on that. They've then got to start planning in terms of what they can achieve on the site, engaging with us at pre-application stage in terms of the details of that, engaging with members as well. That will result in a number of changes. When they finally get the approval of that reserve matters application, then they've got to go through clearing the conditions. And then once they've cleared the conditions, they've got the ground preparation, dealing with contamination and all these other things. So it could be, I mean, one of the reasons why the government says that there is a 3-year commencement is because it can take that long from outline planning permission being granted to actually start the development. Normally it's about 18 months from an outline to starting construction. When you're given a detailed application permission, it could be, if I'm speaking to Esquire, they would probably say to you they will be on site within a year, starting construction. Is that helpful?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So, sort of from looking at it from sort of trying to average it out, from the day we give permission, it can be anywhere sort of 2 to 4 years before we see a completed house. Is that kind of fair? Thank you.
I think we've all had issues with trees. I doubt that there's any member who hasn't had an issue with trees. But I think what we do need to bear in mind, particularly if you look at the weekly list, just how many applications for tree works come in. Bear in mind the fact that with the planning applications, they go across a range of planning officers. As far as the tree work is concerned, it all goes in one direction. So there is tremendous pressure on that particular section of the council. I'm not saying there isn't pressure across, but there is very significant pressure there. Dave, you mentioned all the complaints. What you didn't mention was the compliments. And I think we do need to focus on the fact that whilst we have people who get upset over certain things, we also have quite a few very satisfied customers, and we shouldn't pass over that too glibly. Vice Chairman, can I ask you to move the noting of these?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Colleagues, I move that the performance report for the period October 21 to end March 2022 be noted with our thanks.
Seconded. Is that agreed? Thank you. That takes us then to the appeal decisions, which is not quite such a good picture.
Chairman, thank you very much. As members have instructed, what we report here is appeal decisions, but in terms of summarising, we've just summarised those following committee's instructions on the basis of the ones that were allowed or the ones we've had decisions and where committee have made a contrary decision to an officer recommendation. So it gives us the ones to really to focus on. So going through these, we've got 21 Bearinggrave Lane, which is a 2-storey side extension with and so on, development there. Now, they got approval. They didn't build what they got consent for, which is never good for this committee. You quite rightly raised concerns that they hadn't built what they got consent for, but you felt that they'd gone too far and it was unacceptable. An inspector took a contrary view to that and allowed the appeal. Then in terms of Lower Rainham Road, whilst this is a committee overturn, I've got to say, professionally, I agreed with the committee decision. This is one where there is a line of properties here, Lower Rainham Road, the line of properties here and line of properties here. That is the private garden of this property. You've got the Riverside Country Park further this way, so open countryside here and here and here. My view, and that of the committee, was that proposal to build 3 houses in this area in here was an encroachment into that countryside. And you took that view when you looked at how it looks from Lower Rainham Road. So this is what it looks like from Lower Rainham Road. So that's part of the garden, that's the other part of the garden. And you felt that didn't look residential, it didn't look like a domestic garden, it looked like part of the countryside. And I totally, professionally, I agree with you. However, an inspector took a contrary view. He felt that the balance was towards the fact that we haven't got a 5-year housing land supply, but also that there is a need for custom and self-build. We don't meet our needs on that. So he allowed the appeal, subject to it being custom and self-built. Interestingly, though, he agreed with members' points that this is not a sustainable site, that this is a development which will require car usage. A little bit surprised and disappointed with the decision. Although my officers had recommended approval, I personally agreed with what members were recommending on that one. 24 Pier Road. This is single house just in here, within a residential area. On the opposite side of the road, you've got student accommodation, you've got Tesco's, and it's more mixed use. But this side, it's residential. The application is for a significant alterations extension of a dwelling to provide 14, an HMO for 14 students. Members took the view that this wasn't a mixed-use area, and that this property was capable of single-family accommodation. It was therefore contrary to our policies, and you refused you refused the application. The inspector agreed with you on the back that this was not a mixed-use area, that this was a residential area, but despite that, did not see the harm of this significant extension to the proposal and its use as an HMO for student accommodation. We then get to Parkwood Green Shopping Centre, and it's interesting the debate and discussion earlier on this. This is one where we took the view that it was contrary to our guidance note that there was already sufficient takeaways in the shopping centre, and that to have more would affect with the vitality and viability of the centre. We also took the view that there were residential above, and there was likely to be smells and disturbance to residents. An inspector took a contrary view. Surprisingly, they said that your guidance note says 15%, which you've referred to earlier, and the proposal would result in an increase in the number of takeaways, which would take it up to 16%. But it's only 1% more, so we'll allow that. That's all right. And then said that odour control could be appropriately controlled by condition. So they allowed so he or she allowed the appeal. Salisbury Avenue. This is another one where I disagreed with my officers on this, and actually agreed with members. This is a site where you've got Salisbury Avenue, you've got two-storey properties along here. You've got a new development, or relatively new development, at the back of two-storey. But in the back gardens here, what you have is large garages, but single-storey buildings. And what was proposed was this two-storey building. Members felt it was inappropriate in this location. They were happy in principle with residential, but it should be single-storey to be more in keeping with what's on this side of Lyra Close. An inspector took a contrary view to that. 65 Norman Close. Proposal, a number of parts of the proposal here. It's a single-storey extension to the front and part single, part two-storey extension to the rear. Members had concerns regarding the single-storey front extension, which is effectively to take it up to the boundary here. And then there's a neighbour window just in there. Members felt that would be an unacceptable impact on the neighbour. Inspector disagreed with that. 87 Rock Avenue. This was a surprising decision. This was conversion of this property into an HMO. Conversion is already an HMO. It's changing that from a 7-bedroom to an 8-bedroom HMO. We raised concerns on that. Inspector didn't agree that in terms of the extra disturbance that would cause, and allowed the appeal and awarded costs against us. Surprisingly, literally just down the road, a similar proposal for an HMO was dismissed at appeal. We tested whether we could judicially review this decision, but the advice we got back was it was sufficiently different from the other site to mean that we wouldn't be able to win that judicial review. 142 Napier Road. This is one where I think the inspector did get it right. A pair of semi-detached houses in here, and we refused this on the basis of an overdevelopment of the site. The inspector took the view that it was appropriate in terms of 2 houses in there. We then get to the former Lord Duncan public house. There were 3 appeals here. This is a conversion to an HMO. So it's a planning application, it's a listed building application, but it's also an enforcement notice. The inspector allowed the appeals in relation to the listed building and listed building and planning applications for it to be an HMO, but raised agreed with us in relation to the enforcement notice. However, his decision was flawed in relation to this decision, and we're judicially reviewing it. 9 The Rise, this is a proposal for a garage in the front area. The inspector took the view that there were other garages in the front garden areas in the area, and therefore it would not be harmful, subject to additional tree planting in the front. Then finally we get to, well not finally, we get to East Hill, and the decision to approve an outline application for 800 houses on the land shown in red there. The inspector took the view that in time, well, it would settle in with the landscape. I do not agree with that decision at all. And again, you can see very clearly from this view. Now, we took the inspector up to this site, up to Darland Banks, to look down at this site. I'm still stunned by the decision that the inspector made on this. How he could say that in time would be appropriately landscaped and hidden, I don't understand the decision. However, we did take just the fact that we don't like the decision is not a reason for the courts to overturn it. We have to show that the inspector has erred in law, or that he's made a decision which is Wednesbury unreasonable, i.e. no reasonable person could make that decision. And with the 5-year housing land supply issue, he could reasonably make that decision. We then took counsel advice, I think, from 4 different barristers who all said that they were surprised at the decision, but the inspector had very carefully worded it and clearly taken legal advice on the wording, so that we couldn't say that he'd erred in law, even though the decision, in my view, is completely balmy. Mearsborough Road, stable proposal in there, which the inspector took the view that that wasn't harmful to the landscape character of the area. St Paul's Close, this is an existing property for 18 St Paul's Close, and there what they wanted to do was to extend it to the side and then to change that to a separate dwelling. I still feel that we got that one right in terms of officers. I think the inspector was wrong. I think going right up to the boundary, which is what's proposed, is harmful to the street scene. And you can see, your inspector took the view, well, there's already a fence there. You just put in a building. It's not the same. A single-storey fence compared to a 2-storey building is not the same at all. So I think the inspector got it wrong. Then we have some adverts. These are existing adverts on the corner of Canterbury Street and the A2, being replaced by an electronic sign, a sign which moves and changes. We took the view that this was right on the junction here and would be distracting and therefore be a highway hazard. Inspector took a different view. Cliff Road, proposal for an HMO on here. My view is that this is a terrace property, it's capable of single-family accommodation, and inspector felt that it was acceptable to be a house in multiple occupation. Finally get to Everest Lane, which actually is this relates to this building here, this garage in here, which I remember dealing with on appeal back in the late 80s as a young planner, where I said at that point in time this would be then converted to a dwelling at later times. An inspector disagreed with me then. They now want to convert it to a dwelling house. And an inspector has said that that's acceptable. Chairman, those are the appeals. Thank you.
Does any Councillor Backwell?
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thanks to Mr. Harris and his colleagues who've had to deal with all of those appeal procedures as well. I don't think that officers or indeed elected members, where we've overturned officer recommendations, should necessarily, as it were, feel any sense of guilt in doing that. The T-shirts should say, in respect of many of the cases that were overturned on appeal, this is not a perfect science, and it isn't. And it's perhaps tempting when we look at pure lists like that to almost be rather scientific about saying, oh, we lost this one, we lost that one. We all know it's not as simple as that. We all know that planning inspectors, and we have an example from the 2 Gillingham appeals that Mr. Harris referred to, can in fact take entirely different views from any other inspector. But unless we can seek to have their decision knocked out by the High Court on JR, their decision stands. They make the ultimate decision. And I think it's also important that in cases, many cases where we fight for our ward residents or we reflect the locality's views, you know, that's all got to be balanced as part of the democratic process, which we're all here for. The planning inspector may not like what the democratic process results in so far as the vote by members on an application is concerned. But I think we have a right to fight for our residents where they urge us to take a certain view if we, on balance, agree with it. So I don't think anyone should feel beaten up by this. Statistics are statistics. What we don't get is the list of all the decisions collectively we've made that haven't been challenged. So we must see this, I think, in perspective and pass our thanks to all of our officers and, where appropriate, our instructed lawyers who've dealt with these appeals. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Buckle. As ever, a very measured statement. I don't feel guilty. I get frustrated because I think that by and large, when we are local, we know more about an area than an inspector who sees it for 5 minutes. But right, I have Councillor Hubbard and then Councillor Potter. Councillor Hubbard.
Yeah, just a first comment about Fort Everest Lane. It's an unusual little road, it's sort of a link lane between what would have been 2 roads that supported the windmills in the past. And obviously I did look at it myself and I came to the conclusion that I didn't really object to it because I thought, well, it's already gone down that road a long time ago. So I was surprised to see it refused. I'm not asking for an additional report, but just some stats, basically, of how many applications have been for the delegated side of the council, and an indication of what they might be. Because you talked about HMOs, and obviously there's 2 on this report. And so to get an idea of what the officers are doing, not behind the scenes as far as the committee concerns, so we have an idea that this is a number of refusals in a period of time, no details, but just a number, and just highlighting the types of things that you're currently doing as delegated, because that could indicate to us the change. You talked about the drop-off in a number of applications, and that's quite clear from the weekly reports. So we're trying to get an idea of what's happening, the other half of the planning process, you could say.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points. So with regard to 21 Berengrave Lane on page 95, it says the inspector noted that the concern raised that the roof tiles used do not match those of the property before the works were undertaken is a matter for the council. Well, what does that mean? And I'll just hold that one there, because my second point is with regard to 309 Lower Raynham Road, the 3 self-build properties. If they weren't self-build properties, would the application have been successful? And is there a likelihood of, now that they've got permission and established the principle of building the properties there, is there a likelihood that they would then just come forward as under one developer and wouldn't be self-built properties?
Chairman, thank you. Yes, I would say that the inspector put weight on the fact that they were self-built. So Yes, he put weight on the fact that we haven't got 5-year housing land supply. He put weight on the fact that he didn't feel that the landscape impact was as harmful as you as members and indeed myself felt. However, the point that tipped it over to allow was the self-build. So my reading of the appeal statement was, if it hadn't been self-build, that he wouldn't necessarily have allowed the appeal.
Right, I don't have anybody else who has indicated as far as that is concerned. Before we do that, did you want to say anything about the costs? Most of them are pretty historic, and I think we've seen them on a number of occasions. So I'll move to the Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I move that we have noted the report. So moved.
Seconded? Agreed? Thank you, colleagues. That concludes the business for the meeting.